The cockpit of the X-77 Raptor vibrated with the fury of war, a symphony of chaos that Colonel Marcus Ride had long learned to tune out. Red warning lights pulsed across his control panel like the heartbeat of a dying beast, and the shrill scream of proximity alarms pierced the recycled air. Outside, the eternal void stretched endlessly, a pitch-black expanse punctuated by the jagged silhouettes of Umbral warships and the fiery trails of missiles tearing through the vacuum. Marcus's gloved hands gripped the flight sticks, slick with sweat despite the climate controls, as he yanked the fighter into a spiraling dive. A plasma warhead detonated where he'd been seconds ago, its shockwave rattling his teeth. "Ride, bogey on your 6. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled through the comms, sharp and urgent. Marcus twisted in his harness, catching a glimpse of the sleek, insect-like umbral drone locking onto his tail. He slammed the throttle forward, the Raptor's engines roaring as he banked hard to port. The G-forces pressed him into his seat, a familiar ache blooming in his ribs, souvenirs from a crash landing 2 tours ago. "Got it, Chun. Cover me. I'm shaking this bastard." He didn't wait for her reply. With a flick of his wrist, he deployed a decoy flare, the bright burst momentarily blinding the drone's sensors. It veered off, and Marcus lined up his crosshairs, squeezing the trigger. A stream of ion rounds shredded the enemy craft into a cloud of sparking debris. "One down," he muttered, his voice rough from hours of shouting orders over the din of battle. But the victory was short-lived. "Mayday! Mayday!" Chen's scream erupted through the comms, cutting through the static like a knife. "I'm hit. Shields down." Oh God. Her transmission dissolved into a burst of white noise, followed by the unmistakable flash of her fighter exploding in the distance. Marcus's jaw clenched, his dark eyes narrowing behind his visor. That was the 6th pilot he'd lost in 10 minutes. The Umbral fleet wasn't just winning. They were slaughtering Terra's forces, their dark energy cannons slicing through hulls with surgical precision. "Command, this is Colonel Ride." He barked into his headset, dodging another salvo of missiles. "We're getting torn apart out here. Where the hell are my reinforcements?" His squadron, what was left of it, formed up behind him, a ragged line of 5 ships against an enemy armada that outnumbered them 10-1. The eternal void, a lawless stretch of space on the edge of Terra's dominion, had become a graveyard, and Marcus was damn sure he wasn't ready to be buried in it. Static hissed in his ears before a voice cut through. Not the battlefield coordinator he'd expected, but Commander Orion Vex, the grizzled warlord who ran Terra's Outer Rim operations. "Abort mission, Colonel," Vex said, his tone cold and unyielding, like the steel plating of a dreadnought. "Return to orbital Fortress Delta immediately. You're getting married." Marcus's hands froze on the controls, the Raptor drifting for a split second as his brain scrambled to process the words. "Married?" he snapped, voice rising over the blare of a missile lock warning. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm in the middle of a goddamn war. My squad's dying out here. Chen's gone, and..." Another explosion rocked his peripheral vision, a second fighter winking out in a plume of fire. He cursed under his breath, wrenching the ship into a barrel roll to evade the next barrage. "This isn't a request, Ride," Vex interrupted, his voice a low growl. "It's an order. Disengage and RTB now. Your bride's waiting, and she's not human." The comms clicked off, leaving Marcus staring at the void, his pulse pounding louder than the alarms. Married? To an alien? In the middle of the worst offensive he'd seen in 15 years of service? It was insane beyond insane. But Vex didn't bluff, and he didn't waste words. Whatever this was, it was big. "Alpha Squad, this is Ride," he said, forcing calm into his tone as he punched in the retreat coordinates. "We're pulling back. Form up and follow my vector, full burn to Delta." A chorus of confused affirmatives crackled back, but Marcus didn't have time to explain. He hit the afterburners, the Raptor surging forward as the Umbral ships loomed larger behind him, their cannons charging for another volley. The fortress wasn't far, a hulking bastion orbiting a dead moon, but every second felt like an eternity with death riding his tail. When the Raptor finally docked in Delta's hangar bay, Marcus ripped off his helmet and climbed out, his boots hitting the deck with a clang. The air stank of fuel and scorched metal, the chaos of war prep swirling around him. Mechs rolling past with fresh munitions, engineers shouting over the whine of plasma cutters. His flight suit clung to his broad frame, damp with sweat, and his dark hair stuck to his forehead in messy strands. At 38, Marcus was a wall of muscle hardened by years of combat, his face etched with scars, one slicing from his left temple to his jaw, a memento from a knife fight on Rigel 7. He didn't look like a man about to walk down an aisle. Commander Vex waited in the war room, a cavernous chamber lined with tactical holoscreens flickering with live feeds of the battle Marcus had just fled. The older man stood ramrod straight, his cybernetic eye glowing red in the dim light, the other a piercing gray that missed nothing. "You look like hell, Ride," Vex said, tossing a hollow pad onto the table between them. "Seat." "I'll stand," Marcus replied, crossing his arms. "What's this about a wedding? I've got pilots dying out there, and you're pulling me for some diplomatic stunt?" His voice was low, dangerous, the kind that made recruits flinch. But Vex didn't blink. "It's no stunt," Vex said, tapping the hollow pad. A shimmering image sprang to life. A star chart of the eternal void, overlaid with the jagged borders of Terra's territory and the uncharted expanse beyond. "Her name's Lyrian, Queen of the Ether. They're a species from deep in the void, elusive, advanced, and packing dark energy weapons that make our best tech look like toys. The Umbral fleet's been hammering us for months, and we're losing. Badly. This marriage is our ticket to an alliance, or we're all corpses by year's end." Marcus stared at the chart, his tactical mind already tracing the strategic choke points glowing red where Terra's defenses had crumbled. "And I'm the groom because—" Vex leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp. "She asked for you by name, Colonel. Don't ask me how she knows you. Those Ether bastards don't explain themselves to grunts like us. But they've got one condition. You don't see her face until the ceremony. Break that rule, and the deal's off. We'll be fighting 2 wars instead of 1. A chill ran down Marcus's spine, though he masked it behind a scowl. He'd heard rumors about the Ether, whispers swapped over ration packs in the barracks. Skin that glowed like molten starlight, shimmering with every move. Eyes that burned like twin suns, piercing through to your soul. A touch that could unravel a man's mind, leaving him begging for more. They were myths, he'd always thought. Exaggerations from soldiers too long in the black. But now, standing in Vex's war room with the weight of a dying war on his shoulders, those myths felt uncomfortably real. "Why me?" Marcus pressed, his fists tightening. "I'm a soldier, not a diplomat. I blow things up. I don't play house with alien royalty." "You're a hero, Ride," Vex said, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on him. "The Butcher of Epsilon, the man who turned the tide at Rigel 7. Your name carries weight, here and out there. They want you, and we need them. That's the math." He paused, then added, "Besides, I don't trust anyone else not to frag this up." Marcus snorted, running a hand through his hair. "When's this circus start?" "Now," Vex replied, nodding toward the door. "Transports fueled and waiting. You'll meet her on their turf, a warship in the void. Ceremonies in 12 hours. Don't be late." Marcus turned to leave, his boots echoing on the steel floor, but Vex's voice stopped him cold. "One more thing, Colonel. Don't screw this up. Billions are riding on you. And her. Whatever she is, whatever she wants with you, keep your head in the game." The hangar was a hive of activity as Marcus boarded the transport shuttle, a sleek, matte black craft bristling with Terra's best stealth tech. He strapped into the co-pilot's seat, staring out the viewport as the fortress shrank behind him, the void swallowing it whole. His mind raced, replaying Vex's words. "She asked for you by name." Why? He'd never heard of the Ether before today, never crossed their paths in a dozen campaigns. Yet here he was, yanked from a firefight to marry a queen he couldn't even look at, all to save a galaxy that didn't give a damn about him. The shuttle hummed as it slipped into the void, the stars warping into streaks of light. Marcus flexed his hands, feeling the ache of old wounds, and tried to shove down the unease clawing at his gut. Where he understood guns, blood, the cold logic of survival. But this was something else, something dangerous. And deep down, beneath the soldier's discipline and the cynicism of a man who'd seen too much, a flicker of curiosity burned. What kind of woman, what kind of creature, waited for him beyond that veil? A soldier torn from the jaws of war, thrust into a marriage with an alien queen shrouded in mystery. What secrets lurk beneath her glow? Will duty bind them, or will desire break them apart? Hit that subscribe button and join us for this explosive saga of war, passion, and a truth that could reshape the stars. The transport shuttle shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the eternal void snapping into focus beyond the viewport. Marcus Ride leaned forward in the co-pilot's seat, his dark eyes scanning the scene ahead. Orbital Fortress Delta loomed like a jagged scar against the black, a sprawling bastion of gunmetal gray bristling with turrets and fighter bays, its silhouette dwarfed by the dead moon it orbited. But it wasn't the fortress that held his attention. Beyond it, deeper in the void, a crystalline warship glimmered like a shard of captured starlight, its sleek curves and translucent hull a stark contrast to Terra's brutalist designs. That, he knew, was the Ether vessel, the stage for his so-called wedding. ETA, 3 minutes. The pilot grunted, a wiry kid barely out of flight school. Marcus didn't reply, his mind churning. 12 hours ago, he'd been dodging umbral missiles, watching his squad die in fiery bursts. Now he was here, traded like a pawn in some galactic chess game, all for a queen he'd never met. The shuttle's hull creaked as it adjusted course, weaving through a field of debris, wreckage from a recent skirmish, no doubt. The war wasn't waiting for his nuptials. The docking bay of the Ether warship swallowed the shuttle with a hiss of pressurized air, and Marcus stepped out onto a deck that gleamed like polished ice. The air carried a faint metallic tang, overlaid with something sweeter. Ozone, maybe, or some alien spice he couldn't place. Terra soldiers in crisp dress uniforms flanked the entrance, their rifles held at parade rest, while Ether guards stood opposite, tall, live figures in armor that shimmered like liquid silver, their faces hidden behind featureless visors. The tension between the two groups was palpable, a silent standoff beneath the pretense of diplomacy. Colonel Ride, a Terra officer, snapped, saluting sharply. Captain Lena Voss, her blonde hair pulled tight in a bun, was one of Vex's top aides, ruthless, loyal, and not someone Marcus liked dealing with. Follow me. Ceremonies in the central chamber. You've got 10 minutes to change. Change. Marcus raised an eyebrow, glancing down at his flight suit, stained with sweat and carbon scoring from the battle. This is who I am, Voss. If she doesn't like it, tough. Voss's lips thinned, but she didn't argue. Suit yourself. Just don't piss off the Ether. They're twitchy enough already. She led him through a labyrinth of corridors, the walls pulsing faintly with veins of light that seemed to respond to their presence. Marcus's boots clanged against the floor, a deliberate contrast to the Ether guard's silent grace as they shadowed the pair. Every step felt like walking into a trap. The central chamber was a cathedral of crystal, its domed ceiling refracting the void's faint starlight into a kaleidoscope of colors. Rows of seats lined the space, filled with a mix of Terra brass and Ether dignitaries. Generals in metal-laden uniforms beside alien figures draped in flowing robes, their skin shimmering in shades of silver and blue. A raised platform dominated the center, flanked by 2 towering pillars etched with symbols that shifted like liquid when Marcus tried to focus on them. And there, at the far end, stood Commander Vex, his cybernetic eye glinting as he watched Marcus approach. "You're late," Vex said, his voice a low rumble. "Blame the Umbrals." Marcus shot back, stopping beside him. "What's the drill?" Vex nodded toward the platform. "Stand there. Say the words when prompted. Don't touch her until the ritual says you can. And for God's sake, keep your eyes off her face until the veil's gone. Terra can't afford a diplomatic incident." Marcus snorted. "Anything else? Bouquet toss? First dance." "Don't test me, Ride," Vex growled. "This isn't a joke." The Ether are our last shot at turning this war around. You're the linchpin. Act like it. Before Marcus could reply, a ripple passed through the chamber, the air thickening with an electric hum. The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to the arched doorway opposite the platform. Marcus followed their gaze, his pulse kicking up a notch despite himself. For Ether guards entered first, their silver armor catching the light as they took up positions along the aisle. Behind him came Lyrian. She moved like liquid starlight, each step a measured glide that defied gravity. Her form was draped in a ceremonial gown, or what passed for one among the Ether, its fabric a cascade of energy that clung to her curves, shimmering with every motion. A veil of the same material obscured her face, its surface rippling like water, offering only the faintest hint of the features beneath. Marcus couldn't see her eyes, her lips, her expression, but he felt her presence, a weight that pressed against his chest, stirring something primal he couldn't name. The rumors hadn't lied. She was mesmerizing, even shrouded. The Ether guards halted, and Lyrian ascended the platform alone, stopping a meter from Marcus. Up close, he caught the scent of her, ozone and that sweet undertone, now stronger, intoxicating. Her head tilted slightly, the veil shifting just enough to suggest she was studying him. He squared his shoulders, meeting her unseen gaze with the defiance of a man who'd stared down death too many times to count. A Terra diplomat, an older man with a pinched face, stepped forward, flanked by an Ether elder whose silver skin glowed faintly. "We gather to unite Colonel Marcus Ride of Terra and Queen Lyrian of the Ether," the diplomat began, his voice droning through the formalities. "This bond seals an alliance against the umbral threat, a pact of mutual strength and survival." The Ether elder spoke next, her voice a melodic hum that vibrated in Marcus's bones. She recited words in her native tongue, sharp and flowing, before switching to accented English. "By the currents of the void, this union is forged. Step forward and join hands." Marcus hesitated, then stepped closer, extending his hand. Lyrian mirrored him, her fingers emerging from the sleeve of her gown. Long, elegant, tipped with nails that gleamed like polished steel. Their palms met, and a jolt shot up Marcus's arm, hot and electric like grabbing a live wire. His breath caught as her skin brushed his, a texture like silk over molten glass, impossibly smooth yet alive with warmth. What was more than that? Something clicked in his mind, a spark igniting behind his eyes, and suddenly he felt her. Anger, curiosity, a flicker of something deeper, all rushing through him in a flood. He nearly pulled back, but her grip tightened, subtle but firm. His fingers grazed her wrist by accident, a spot just below her palm, and she gasped, a soft, audible sound that sent a shiver down his spine. The sensation hit him again, stronger this time. Heat, sharp and insistent, laced with a hunger that wasn't his own. Her wrist pulsed under his touch, and he realized with a jolt that it was sensitive, an Ether erogenous zone. Maybe his pulse raced, a primal urge flaring to slide his hand higher, to explore the glow beneath her gown, but the weight of 100 watching eyes pinned him in place. "Do you accept this bond?" the elder asked, her golden eyes narrowing as if she'd sensed the shift. "Yes," Lyrian said, her voice low and melodic, cutting through the haze in Marcus's head. It was the first time he'd heard her speak, and it hit him like a shockwave, clear, powerful, with an edge that promised more than words could carry. "Yeah," Marcus managed his throat dry. "I do." The elder raised her hands, and the pillars flared with light, casting a shimmering arc over the platform. "Then it is sealed," she declared. The veil began to dissolve, unraveling in tendrils of energy that faded into the air. Marcus's breath hitched as Lyrian's face emerged. High cheekbones sculpted from liquid light, lips full and faintly silver, and eyes like twin stars, white-hot and endless, locked onto his. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was alive in a way he couldn't define, her gaze piercing through him, stripping away every defense he'd ever built. "Colonel," she said, her voice curling around his name like a caress. "Welcome to my world." Before he could respond, the chamber shuddered, a deep boom reverberating through the crystal walls. Red lights flashed overhead, and a Terra officer shouted, "Incoming! Umbral stealth drones! Multiple contacts!" The crowd erupted into chaos, soldiers scrambling for weapons as Ether guards drew sleek, glowing blades. Marcus instinctively reached for his sidearm, only to remember it wasn't there, stripped for the ceremony. Lyrian's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "With me," she snapped, her tone shifting from regal to commanding. Another explosion rocked the ship, closer this time, and a section of the ceiling cracked, raining shards of crystal onto the floor. Through their touch, Marcus felt her mind again, sharp, focused, and laced with a fury that mirrored his own. She pulled him toward a side passage as drones burst through the main entrance, their cannons whining as they charged. "What the hell's happening?" Marcus yelled, ducking as a plasma bolt seared past his head. "An attack," Lyrian said, her eyes blazing brighter. "They don't want this alliance to hold." She shoved him behind a pillar, her body pressing briefly against his. Warm, electric, a fleeting distraction he couldn't afford. Then she raised her hand, and a pulse of dark energy erupted from her palm, slamming one drone into the wall with a crunch of metal. Marcus grinned despite himself, adrenaline surging. "Nice trick. Got any more?" Her lips curved, a hint of a smile. "You'll see." She grabbed his hand again, and their minds snapped into sync, her thoughts flowing into his, a tactical map of the ship blooming in his head. He saw the drones' positions, the weak points in their formation, all through her eyes. "Fight with me," she said, her voice echoing inside him. He didn't hesitate. "Lead the way, Queen." The crystalline corridors of the Ether warship still vibrated with the aftershocks of the Umbral drone attack as Marcus Ride trailed Lyrian toward the command deck. His boots clanged against the translucent floor, a harsh counterpoint to her silent, flowing steps. The air buzzed with a faint electric charge, the walls pulsing erratically, veins of light flickering like a wounded animal's heartbeat. Marcus's flight suit clung to his sweat-damp skin, the adrenaline from the fight still coursing through him, keeping his senses razor-sharp. Lyrian moved ahead, her glowing silhouette cutting through the dimness, her presence a magnet he couldn't ignore. Their hands had parted back in the ceremony chamber, but the psychic connection lingered, a low, insistent hum in his skull, like a whisper he couldn't shake. They stepped onto the command deck, a circular chamber bathed in the cold glow of holoscreens. Terra officers in crisp gray uniforms manned one side, their faces taut with exhaustion, while Ether technicians, tall, silver-skinned figures with elongated fingers, worked the other, their movements fluid and precise. The screens flickered with live feeds, shattered Umbral drones drifting in the void, their twisted husks glinting faintly before vanishing into the black. Commander Orion Vex dominated the center, his broad frame hunched over a tactical console, his cybernetic eye whirring as it tracked multiple data streams. He straightened as Marcus and Lyrian approached, his gray eye narrowing. "You two in one piece?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. "Still breathing," Marcus replied, brushing a shard of crystal dust from his shoulder. "What's the sitrep?" An Ether officer stepped forward, her skin shimmering like molten silver under the artificial light. "The drones were a scouting force," she said, her voice a melodic hum that grated against Marcus's nerves. "Minimal damage to the Luminera, shields held at 87%. But they'll return with greater numbers. It's their pattern." Vex grunted, his gaze shifting to Lyrian. "Your dark energy weapons. When do we get them online? We're bleeding ships out there, and I'm not in the mood to lose more." Lyrian's star-like eyes, white-hot and unreadable, met his without flinching. "They're operational, Commander," she said, her tone cool and measured, carrying an edge of authority that filled the room. "But this alliance demands integration. Your forces must sync with ours fully." She glanced at Marcus, and through their bond, he caught a flicker of intent, challenge, expectation, a test he hadn't signed up for but couldn't refuse. Marcus crossed his arms, meeting her gaze head-on. The hum in his mind sharpened, her presence threading through his thoughts like a live current. "So what's the play?" he asked, directing the question at both of them. Vex tapped the console, and a holomap flared to life above the table. A three-dimensional sprawl of the Eternal Void's Sector 7 Kappa. Asteroid fields spun lazily in the projection, their jagged edges glowing red where umbral signatures clustered. Gravitational eddies twisted the space between, creating natural choke points that pulsed with strategic importance. "The umbrals are massing here," Vex said, pointing to a dense knot of enemy signals. "They're prepping a push to sever our supply lines from the rim colonies. If they succeed, we're cut off, starred out in weeks. You and the Queen lead a joint fleet, Terra fighters with Ether frigates. Break their vanguard, secure the choke point. No mistakes." "Me?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, his tone dry. "Thought I was here to say I do, not play Admiral." "You're both now," Vex snapped, his patience fraying. "She's got the tech, you've got the gut. I've seen you turn worse odds than this. Rigel, 7 wasn't a picnic either. Make it work, ride, or we're all dead." He waved them off, already barking orders to a nearby officer about shield calibrations. Lyrian tilted her head toward a side exit, her silver hair catching the light like liquid metal. "Come, Colonel. We prepare." Marcus followed, his boots echoing in the quiet as they left the deck. War he understood, guns blazing, ships burning, the brutal clarity of kill or be killed. But this, fighting alongside an alien queen whose mind brushed his like a phantom touch, guiding him in ways he couldn't predict, that was a battlefield he hadn't trained for. The joint fleet launched an hour later, a jagged formation cutting through the void's endless dark. Marcus piloted a refitted X-77 Raptor, its hull reinforced with ether shield tech that shimmered faintly blue, a gift from Lyrian's engineers. His cockpit hummed with familiar sounds. Engine rumble, sensor pings, but the psychic link added a new layer, a second awareness overlapping his own. Lyrian commanded from the bridge of her frigate, the Luminera, a crystalline spearhead at the fleet's core. Her voice crackled through his comms, sharp and clear. "Stay on my wing, Colonel. The Umbrals favor ambushes. Watch the asteroid drifts for cloaked signatures." "Roger that," Marcus replied, his eyes flicking between his scopes and the void ahead. The bond flared as she spoke, feeding him fragments of her perception. The precise alignment of her frigates, the pulse of their dark energy cores, the faint tremor of her focus. It was like seeing through two sets of eyes, disorienting as hell. But he adapted fast, his soldiers' instincts latching onto the edge it gave him. The ambush hit like a thunderclap. Umbral fighters erupted from the asteroid field, their black hulls blending with the debris until their cannons flared, spitting bolts of dark energy that warped the space around them. Marcus yanked his Raptor into a spiraling climb, barking orders to his squadron. "Alpha Wing, break left, draw their fire. Bravo, cover the frigates." The Terra pilots responded with crisp affirmatives, their ships weaving through the chaos as Lyrian's voice cut in. "Firing solution locked, brace for impact." The Luminera and its sister ships unleashed a barrage of shimmering pulses, each blast a ripple of light that tore through Umbral fighters like paper. Marcus watched one explode in a silent bloom of debris, then dove to finish off a straggler, his ion cannons chewing through its shields. Their coordination was uncanny. Her mind fed him tactical overlays faster than his sensors could, his reflexes turning her strategies into pinpoint strikes. Together, they carved a bloody swath through the enemy vanguard, the void lighting up with the wreckage of their foes. "Choke points in range," Marcus reported, banking through a field of spinning rocks. "We're almost there." "Good," Lyrian said, her voice steady but laced with a warmth that caught him off guard. "Pride, maybe, or something more. Hold position. I'm reinforcing your flank with the Etheris." A second frigate slid into view on his scopes, its cannons already firing. The battle stretched into hours, a relentless grind of fire and evasion. Marcus's Raptor took hits, shields flickering, hull groaning. But he kept it together, weaving through enemy formations while Lyrian's frigates hammered the larger threats. By the time the last Umbral ship broke off, retreating into the black, the choke point was theirs. The fleet held, battered but intact. A hard-won victory in a war that didn't pause for breath. Marcus docked in the Luminara's hangar, climbing out as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving his muscles heavy and sore. His Raptor bore fresh scars, blackened patches where energy bolts had grazed it, but it had held, just like he had. The hangar buzzed with activity, Terra pilots debriefing, Ether crews tending to their glowing ships, but Marcus's focus narrowed as he spotted Lyrian waiting on the observation deck above. She stood alone, her ceremonial gown swapped for a combat suit that hugged her alien frame, its faint glow tracing the lines of her body. He climbed the stairs, each step amplifying the hum in his head, drawing him to her like a moth to flame. "Well fought, Colonel," she said, turning as he reached her. The deck's transparent ceiling framed the void's endless sprawl, stars glinting faintly against the black. Her eyes burned brighter here, twin suns in the dimness, and that sweet ozone scent rolled off her, tugging at something deep and primal in his chest. "You too," Marcus replied, stopping a few feet away. "That mind-link trick saved my ass more than once out there." "It's more than a trick." She stepped closer, her movements deliberate, her glow intensifying. "Our bond strengthens with proximity, with trust. You felt it, yes?" He nodded, the hum now a steady pulse syncing with his heartbeat. "Hard to miss, like you're in my head all the time." "Then let me show you its depth." She closed the distance, stopping inches away, her heat washing over him. Her scent was intoxicating now, a pull he couldn't fight. "Touch me here," she said, lifting her chin to expose the slender column of her neck, smooth, glowing, a faint pulse throbbing beneath the surface. "It's sensitive for us. It will deepen what we share." Marcus's breath caught, his soldiers' discipline clashing with a raw, unshakable want. Her nearness was a fire under his skin, her eyes daring him to cross a line he hadn't known existed. He raised his hand, fingers hovering over her neck, then pressed them gently against her skin. It was warm, impossibly soft, like velvet over molten glass, and alive with a subtle tremor. Lyrian's breath hitched, a low, throaty sound that shot straight to his core, and her glow flared, bathing them in a soft, radiant light. The bond erupted in his mind, a cascade of colors he couldn't name, emotions crashing like a tidal wave. He felt her desire, sharp and electric, slamming into his own, amplifying it. His thumb brushed higher, tracing the curve where her neck met her jaw, and she shivered, her eyes fluttering half-closed. "Marcus," she whispered, his name a plea that stoked the heat pooling in his gut. His fingers itched to slide lower, to explore the glowing lines of her collarbone, her chest, sensitive spots he could sense through their link, places that would unravel them both if he dared. He leaned in, their breaths mingling, the air thick with unspoken need. Her lips were close, full and faintly silver, tempting him to close the gap. "What are we doing?" he murmured, voice rough with restraint. "Learning each other," she replied, her hand rising to grip his wrist, holding him there. "This is what we are now, bound beyond flesh." Her mind pressed deeper into his, flooding him with flashes, her commanding the Luminara in battle, her training with Ether warriors in some distant war, her watching him from afar before they'd ever met, her golden eyes tracking his every move. The intimacy was raw, overwhelming, a nakedness that stripped him bare and lit a fire he hadn't felt in years. Their lips were a heartbeat apart, her heat searing through him, when the deck lurched violently. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the chamber, shattering the moment. Marcus pulled back, cursing under his breath as reality crashed in. What the hell now? Lyrian's eyes snapped open, the glow dimming as she spun to a hollow screen flickering to life on the wall. "Ambush," she said, her voice hardening. "Umbral reinforcements, larger than before. The feed showed a swarm of enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace, frigates and destroyers, their cannons already charging, dwarfing the earlier probe. Marcus snatched his helmet from the floor where it had fallen, the steamy haze replaced by cold focus. Guess playtime's over. She shot him a look, half frustration, half promise, her hand brushing his arm as she moved past. For now, they sprinted for the bridge, their bond humming with shared urgency as the fleet scrambled to respond. The battle was a brutal slog. Hours of relentless fire, near misses, and desperate maneuvers. Marcus's Raptor danced through enemy formations, his cannons blazing, while Lyrian's frigates unleashed waves of dark energy that shattered umbral hulls. The psychic link kept them in lockstep, her warnings reaching him before his sensors, his gut calls refining her strikes. By the time the last enemy ship retreated, the Luminara's shields were flickering, and Marcus's fighter bore fresh scars, but they'd held the line, barely. Back on the bridge, exhaustion clawed at him, his muscles screaming from the strain, but victory kept him sharp. Lyrian stood beside him, her presence a steady anchor amid the chaos of damage reports and crew chatter. "We're stronger together," she said, her voice low, meant only for him. "But there's more you need to know." He turned to her, catching the shift in her tone, serious, guarded, a weight behind her words. "Spit it out." She hesitated, then stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. Her touch reignited the bond, and images flooded his mind. Not hers this time, but something older, buried deep. A sterile lab, Terra scientists in white coats, a DNA helix twisting with alien markers. His DNA, manipulated, engineered. Her voice cut through the vision, soft but piercing. "This bond isn't random, Marcus. You carry something ancient, something from the Star Weavers, the ones who forged us both." I felt at the moment we touched. He staggered back, the revelation hitting like a punch to the sternum. "What the hell are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not entirely human," she replied, her eyes locking onto his with unrelenting intensity. "And someone on Terra knew it when they sent you to me." Before he could respond, Vex's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and urgent. "Ride, report to the war room now. We got a problem." Marcus glanced at Lyrian, her expression unreadable, but her mind buzzing with questions that echoed his own. Anger, confusion, a hunger for truth. "This isn't over," he said, voice tight with barely contained fury. "No," she agreed, her hand lingering on his arm, her touch a promise and a tether. "It's just beginning." He stormed off the bridge, the weight of her words sinking in, fueling a fire that burned hotter than the battle he'd just fought. Terra had answers, Vex had answers, and Marcus was damn well going to get them, even if he had to tear the truth out of command with his bare hands. But as he walked away, Lyrian's presence lingered in his mind, her heat and her secrets wrapping around him like a second skin, a bond he couldn't escape and didn't want to. The command deck of the Luminara buzzed with a tense quiet as Marcus Ride stood beside Lyrian, the afterglow of their victory in Sector 7 Kappa fading fast. The holoscreens flickered with damage reports, Terra fighters limping back with scarred hulls, Ether frigates nursing flickering shields, but the choke point was secure, the umbral vanguard broken. For now, Marcus's hands rested on the edge of a console, his knuckles white from gripping it too long, the ache in his muscles a dull roar beneath the surface. His Raptor had taken a beating, and so had he, but the psychic bond with Lyrian kept him sharp, her steady presence a tether in the storm of war. She stood close, too close, maybe, her combat suit glowing faintly, the light tracing the alien curves of her body. Her star-like eyes scanned the screens, but he felt her attention on him through their link, a quiet hum that pulsed with questions and something hotter, unspoken. The revelation she dropped on the observation deck. His DNA, the Star Weavers, Terra's hidden hand, still gnawed at him, a splinter he couldn't pull out. He'd stormed off to confront Vex, but the war room summons had been delayed by a flurry of post-battle logistics. Now, standing here, the weight of it pressed harder. "Marcus," Lyrian said, her voice low, cutting through the chatter of officers and technicians. You're restless. I feel it. She turned to face him fully, her silver hair catching the light like a halo, her scent, ozone and that sweet undertone, filling the space between them. Yeah, he replied, voice rough from hours of shouting orders. You drop a bomb like you're not entirely human and expect me to sit still? I need answers now. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm, and the bond flared, warm, electric, a jolt that steadied him even as it stoked the fire in his gut. You'll have them, she said. But first we survive. Her eyes flicked to the holomap, where new red blips flared at the edge of the sector. Umbral signatures, too many, too fast. They're coming. Before Marcus could respond, the deck shuddered, a deep boom rattling the crystalline walls. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as Vex's voice roared over the comms. All hands, battle stations. Umbral fleet dropping out of hyperspace, full assault. The screens lit up with the enemy armada. Destroyers, carriers, a swarm of fighters pouring into the void like a tidal wave of black steel. This wasn't a probe or a skirmish. It was a hammer blown meant to crush them. Marcus grabbed his helmet, already moving for the hangar. Guess we're not done yet. Lyrian matched his stride, her voice sharp. Stay with me. We fight as one. Their bond snapped into focus, her tactical awareness flooding his mind. Enemy positions, fleet vectors, a map of the battlefield sharper than any sensor could provide. They hit the hangar at a run, Marcus climbing into his battered Raptor as Lyrian boarded a sleek Ether interceptor docked beside it. A rare sight, her taking the field directly. Cover my 6, she said through the comms, her interceptor's engines flaring to life. Always, he shot back, the Raptor lifting off with a groan of strained metal. The fleet launched into chaos, Terra and Ether ships forming a ragged line against the Umbral onslaught. The battle was a meat grinder, dark energy bolts clashing with plasma barges, ships exploding in silent blooms of fire. Marcus's Raptor danced through the fray, his cannons blazing, while Lyrian's interceptor wove a deadly pattern, her dark energy pulses shredding enemy fighters with surgical precision. Their bond was a lifeline, her warnings hitting him before his scopes, his instincts guiding her strikes. They were a force of nature, unstoppable until they weren't. Mid-battle, the Luminera lurched, its shields flaring red as internal explosions rocked its hull. Marcus's comms crackled with static, then a Terra officer's panicked voice. Sabotage. Systems offline. Someone's. The transmission cut out as the frigate's guns fell silent, leaving it a sitting duck. Marcus's gut twisted, his eyes locking onto Lyrian's interceptor through the cockpit glass. What the hell's happening? Her response came through their bond. Not the comms. Faster, rawer. Betrayal. A flash of her perception hit him. Terra engineers planting charges, Ether guards turning weapons on their own. Before he could process it, his Raptor jolted, shields dropping to 0 as a Terra fighter. Alpha Wing, one of his own, fired on him. Son of a... He banked hard, evading the next salvo, but the damage was done. His engines sputtered, warning lights screaming. Marcus eject. Lyrian's voice cut through the chaos, her interceptor diving to shield him. An Umbral destroyer loomed ahead, its cannons charging, and he knew he was out of options. He slammed the eject button, the cockpit canopy blasting away as his seat launched into the void. The cold hit him like a fist, his suit's oxygen kicking in as he tumbled toward the dead moon below, the battle, a fading storm above. Lyrian's interceptor followed, taking hits as she chased him down. Her voice echoed in his mind. Hold on. And then she was there, her ship snagging his ejection seat with a tractor beam, pulling him into its tiny cargo bay. The hull sealed, and he hit the deck hard, gasping as the artificial gravity kicked in. Lyrian landed beside him, her interceptor shuddering as it crashed onto the moon's surface, dust billowing around them. She ripped off her helmet, her silver hair wild, her glowing skin streaked with sweat. You're alive, she said, voice shaky with relief. Marcus yanked off his own helmet, staggering to his feet, the bond pulsing with her fear, her fury, and something hotter simmering beneath it all. Barely, he growled, stepping closer. What the hell just happened? My own people shot me down. She grabbed his arm, steadying him as the crashed ship groaned around them. Terra and Ether, rogue factions on both sides. They don't want this alliance. They never did. Her hand slid to his chest, and the bond flared, flooding him with flashes. Terra generals plotting with Ether elders, sabotage plans whispered in shadowed rooms. We're targets now. Marcus's breath hitched, her touch igniting a heat that cut through the adrenaline and rage. They were alone, stranded, the wreckage their only shelter. We need to move, he said, but his voice was rough, his eyes locked on hers. Not yet, she murmured, stepping closer, her body pressing against his. You're hurt. Her fingers brushed his side where shrapnel had torn through his suit, a shallow gash leaking blood. She knelt, peeling back the fabric, her touch gentle but electric. Then, as she worked, her hand slid lower, unintentionally at first, grazing the top muscle of his lower abdomen, then dipping to the sensitive skin along his hip, an ether erogenous zone mirrored in her own biology. He froze, a jolt of raw need surging through their bond, her glow flaring as she felt it too. Lyrian, he rasped, his hand catching hers, pulling it back to his chest. But the damage was done. Their minds merged in a flood of heat, her desire crashing into his. She rose, her lips inches from his, her breath warm against his skin. Feel me, she whispered, guiding his hand to her spine, a glowing ridge beneath her suit, hypersensitive, alive with energy. His fingers traced it, and she shuddered, a soft moan escaping her lips, her glow pulsing brighter. The bond deepened, memories flashing, her watching him, wanting him, long before this war, and his restraint snapped, his other hand gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. Their lips hovered, the air thick with need, when a shadow loomed outside the wreckage, an umbral patrol closing in. Marcus cursed, pulling back, the moment shattering. Later, he growled, grabbing a scavenged pistol from the debris. Later, she agreed, her voice a promise as she drew a glowing blade. But the heat lingered, a fire banked but not extinguished, as they braced for the fight ahead. The wrecked Ether Interceptor groaned around Marcus and Lyrian, its hull creaking as the moon's thin atmosphere settled the dust kicked up by their crash landing. Marcus gripped the scavenged pistol, its cold metal grounding him as the shadow of the umbral patrol loomed closer outside, a squad of drones and armored troops sweeping the surface, their scanners glinting in the faint starlight. Lyrian stood beside him, her glowing blade humming faintly, her combat suit streaked with grime but still radiant. The heat of their interrupted moment lingered in the air, her touch on his hip, his fingers on her spine, simmering beneath the surface, a fire banked but far from extinguished. 5 hostiles, maybe more, Marcus muttered, peering through a jagged tear in the hull. His breath fogged briefly in the cold, his suit's heaters struggling to compensate. We're pinned unless we move. Lyrian nodded, her star-like eyes narrowing as she scanned the terrain through their bond. A rocky expanse dotted with craters, a faint shimmer in the distance hinting at something artificial. There, she said, pointing with her blade. A structure, old buried. We can take cover. Her voice was steady, but the psychic link pulsed with urgency, and a flicker of something else, a curiosity about what lay ahead. Works for me, Marcus replied, checking the pistol's charge. Half a clip, enough to make a dent. On 3. 1, 2, he kicked the hatch open, and they bolted, the drones whirring to life behind them. Plasma bolts seared the ground at their heels, kicking up plumes of dust as they zigzagged toward the shimmer. Lyrian's blade flashed, deflecting a shot mid-run, while Marcus returned fire, dropping one drone in a shower of sparks. Their bond kept them in sync, her dodging left as he covered right, a dance honed by hours of combat. They reached the structure, a half-buried dome of dark metal and crystal, its surface etched with faint, shifting runes. It wasn't ether or terratech. It was older, alien in a way that set Marcus's nerves on edge. Lyrian pressed her hand to a panel, and the runes flared, a hidden door grinding open with a hiss of stale air. They slipped inside, the door sealing behind them just as the umbral troops closed in, their muffled shouts fading into silence. The interior was a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with towering pillars that pulsed with a dim, amber light. The air was thick, heavy with age, and a massive console sat at the center, a slab of crystal and metal covered in glyphs that shimmered like liquid. Marcus lowered his pistol, his breath steadying as he took it in. "What is this place?" Lyrian sheathed her blade, her glow reflecting off the walls as she approached the console. "A relic," she said, her voice soft but weighted. "From the ones who came before, the Star Weavers, maybe. I've seen echoes of this in our archives." She didn't elaborate, and Marcus didn't press. The name hung between them, a thread from her earlier revelation about his DNA, but the immediate threat kept it at bay. He joined her at the console, their shoulders brushing, the bond flaring with her tension and his own. "Can it help us?" he asked, eyeing the glyphs. "We're sitting ducks out here." "Perhaps." She ran her fingers over the surface, and the amber light intensified, a low hum filling the chamber. A hollow projection flickered to life above the console. Not a map or weapon schematic, but a swirling helix of light, DNA-like, pulsing with data. Voices whispered through their bond. Ancient, overlapping, speaking in a tongue he didn't know but somehow understood. Unity. Convergence. The bond awakens. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's us, isn't it? Whatever they did to me, to us." Lyrian nodded, her eyes locked on the helix. "It's a message or a trigger. They meant for this to happen." Before she could say more, the chamber shook, dust raining from the ceiling as an explosion rocked the surface above. The Umbral Patrol had found them, their weapons pounding the dome. "We're out of time," Marcus said, stepping back. "Can this thing fight?" Her hand pressed harder on the console, and the pillars flared brighter, a surge of energy coursing through the chamber. "Not directly," she said, her voice tight with focus. "But it can broadcast, send a signal through the void. If we amplify our bond," she trailed off, turning to him, her eyes burning with intent. He caught her meaning, the heat from their earlier touch flaring back to life. "You're saying we link up, fully?" "Yes," she said, stepping closer, her hand sliding to his chest. "It's the only way." The chamber shook again, cracks spidering across the walls, but her presence drowned it out. She guided his hand back to her spine, that glowing ridge beneath her suit, hypersensitive, alive with energy. His fingers pressed against it, and she gasped, her glow pulsing brighter, her body arching into his touch. The bond deepened instantly, a flood of sensation, her fear, her resolve, her want, crashing into him. "More," she whispered, her voice trembling with need. His hand slid lower, tracing the curve of her lower back, another sensitive spot that made her moan softly, her glow flaring like a supernova. Their minds merged fully, a raw, electric union that stripped away every barrier. He felt her, every battle she'd fought, every night she'd watched him from afar, her longing a mirror to his own. His other hand gripped her hip, pulling her flush against him, their lips hovering as the chamber's energy synced with their pulse. The console responded, the helix spinning faster, a signal surging outward through the void. Marcus saw it through her eyes, umbral ships faltering, their crews clutching their heads as the broadcast overwhelmed them, Terra and Ether traders staggering in confusion. It wasn't a weapon, it was truth, their bond weaponized, a psychic shockwave that bought them time. But it wasn't enough. The dome buckled, a section collapsing as umbral troops breached the entrance, their rifles raised. Marcus yanked Lyrian behind a pillar, the moment shattering as he fired his pistol, dropping one soldier in a spray of blood. "We need to move," he shouted, his voice hoarse. She nodded, her blade flashing as she cut down another foe. "There's a passage deeper in." They fought their way through, the bond guiding their strikes, his shots covering her slashes, her deflections opening his lines of fire. The umbral troops fell, but more poured in, relentless, forcing them down a narrow tunnel lined with the same pulsing pillars. The tunnel opened into a second chamber, smaller, but dominated by a circular platform. A teleport pad? Maybe, or control hub. The walls here were etched with scenes, tall, translucent figures weaving light into DNA strands, seeding planets with life. Terra, Ether, others lost to time. Marcus caught his breath, the images confirming what Lyrian had said about the Star Weavers. But there was no time to linger. The umbral pursuit was closing in, their shouts echoing down the tunnel. Lyrian slammed her hand onto the platform's center, and it flared to life, a ring of energy encircling them. "Hold me," she said, pulling him close. He wrapped an arm around her waist, his hand brushing her spine again, reigniting the heat despite the chaos. She shivered, her glow merging with the platform's light, and the bond pulsed with a final command. Escape. A flash blinded him, the chamber vanishing as they were hurled through space, the signal still rippling outward. When his vision cleared, they were sprawled on a new surface, another ruin, hidden deeper in the void, its walls alive with the same amber glow. The umbral threat was gone, for now, but the betrayal, the rogue factions, Terra's lies, loomed larger than ever. Marcus sat up, Lyrian beside him, her breathing ragged but her eyes fierce. "We made it," she said, her hand finding his, the bond humming with their shared survival, and the promise of what they'd left unfinished. "Barely," he replied, his voice a growl as he pulled her closer, the heat between them flaring anew. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." The amber-lit ruin trembled faintly beneath Marcus, Ride, and Lyrian as they caught their breath, sprawled on the cold, rune-etched floor of this new sanctuary. The teleportation had ripped them from the jaws of the umbral patrol, leaving behind the collapsing dome and its relentless pursuers, but the echoes of betrayal still rang louder than the silence around them. Marcus's chest heaved, his suit's oxygen reserves beeping a low warning, the shallow gash on his side throbbing with every movement. Lyrian sat up beside him, her silver hair wild, her glowing skin streaked with dust and sweat, but her star-like eyes burned with a fierce resolve that mirrored the fire in his gut. Her hand rested in his, their bond pulsing, a lifeline of heat and strength amid the chaos they'd escaped. "We made it," she said again, her voice ragged but steady, her fingers tightening around his. The psychic link hummed with their shared survival, a thread of relief laced with the unresolved heat from their earlier touch. Her spine under his fingers, her moan echoing in his mind. "Barely," Marcus growled, pulling her closer, his arms sliding around her waist as he fought the urge to reignite that fire right here, right now. The weight of her body against his was a grounding force, but his mind churned with fury. "My own damn people, Alpha Wing, try to kill me. And your side wasn't exactly spotless either. What the hell's going on?" Lyrian's glow dimmed slightly, her expression hardening as she pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. "It's bigger than us," she said, her voice low, edged with a bitterness he felt through their bond. "Factions, rogue generals on Terra, elders among the Ether. They've been plotting against this alliance from the start. I saw it when we linked, Terra engineers sabotaging the Luminera, my own guards turning blades on their kin. They fear what we represent." Marcus's jaw clenched, his free hand curling into a fist. "And what's that? Some lab rat experiment they can't control?" The revelation about his DNA, tainted with ancient markers, a legacy from the Star Weavers, still burned, a wound deeper than the one on his side. They knew, didn't they? "Vex, command, someone set me up for this." She nodded, her hand sliding to his chest, resting over his racing heart. "Yes, and they used me to trigger it. But it's not just you. Our bond threatens their power. They'd rather see us dead than united. Her touch flared the bond again, and flashes hit him. Secret meetings in Terra's war rooms, Ether elders chanting in shadowed halls, both sides agreeing to sabotage the fleet and pin it on the Umbral. It was a conspiracy woven tight, and they were the loose thread meant to be cut. "Son of a bitch," Marcus muttered, his voice a low growl as he stood, pulling her up with him. The chamber stretched around them, its amber-lit pillars casting long shadows, the walls whispering with faint energy. The circular platform that had saved them glowed softly, its runes pulsing in time with their bond, a relic of a past neither of them fully understood. So what now? We're stranded, hunted by both sides, with a busted ship and half a clip. Lyrian stepped to the platform, her fingers brushing its surface, coaxing a faint hum from the ancient tech. "This place, it's more than a refuge," she said, her eyes scanning the walls. The etched scenes, tall figures weaving light into life, caught the light, a silent testament to the ones who'd built it. It's a hub, a piece of their network. If we can activate it fully, we might turn the tide. Marcus joined her, his shoulder brushing hers, the bond sparking with her determination. "Turn it how? That signal we sent. It messed with the Umbral, sure, but it didn't stop the traitors up there." He jerked his head toward the ceiling, imagining the fleet above, Terra and Ether ships now turned against each other, the Umbral armada circling like vultures. "It was a start," she said, her voice firm. "A broadcast of truth, our bond, our unity. It disrupted them, but we need more. This hub can amplify it, reach every ship, every mind in the void. Force them to see what's been hidden." She pressed both hands to the platform, and the runes flared brighter, a low rumble shaking the floor. "But it needs us together." He caught the weight in her words, the heat flickering back to life in their link. "Like before?" he asked, stepping closer, his hand hovering over her spine, that glowing ridge he'd touched, the memory of her shivers still fresh. "Yes," she murmured, turning to face him, her glow intensifying. "But deeper." She guided his hand back to her spine, pressing it firmly against the sensitive curve, and he felt it again, her gasp, her body arching into his touch, her glow pulsing like a heartbeat. The bond surged, a raw flood of sensation, her fear, her resolve, her need, crashing into his own. His fingers traced lower, brushing the base of her spine, another tender spot that drew a soft, desperate sound from her throat. "Marcus," she breathed, her hands gripping his shoulders, pulling him closer. He didn't resist, his other hand sliding to her hip, digging into the soft glow of her skin as their bodies pressed together. The bond deepened, their minds merging fully, a storm of shared memories, her battles and his, her longing and his, a fire that threatened to consume them. Her lips parted, inches from his, her breath warm against his skin, and he felt the platform respond, the runes blazing, the amber light surging through the chamber. "Keep going," she whispered, her voice trembling with need and power. "It's working." The signal flared outward, stronger this time, a psychic wave that rippled through the void. Marcus saw it through her eyes. Umbral crews collapsing, Terra traitors clutching their heads, Ether elders faltering as the truth of their betrayal flooded every mind. It wasn't just disruption now. It was exposure, a weapon forged from their union. But it came at a cost. The platform's energy spiked, the chamber shaking violently as cracks split the walls. "We've got company," Marcus said, pulling back as the rumble grew louder, his pistol snapping up. The tunnel they'd fled through echoed with footsteps. Umbral troops, reinforced, breaching the ruin. The signal had drawn them like moths to a flame. Lyrian drew her blade, its glow matching her own as she stepped beside him. "We hold them here," she said, her voice fierce despite the strain. "Until the fleet responds." They fought as one, the bond guiding their every move, his shots picking off soldiers as her blade danced through the fray, deflecting bolts and slicing armor. The Umbral troops were relentless, their numbers swelling, forcing Marcus and Lyrian back toward the platform. A stray bolt grazed his arm, searing through his suit, and he grunted, blood dripping onto the floor. Lyrian's glow flared as she shielded him, her blade a blur, but the tide was turning against them. Then the platform pulsed, a final surge of light erupting as the signal peaked. Marcus felt it, a wave of clarity washing over the void, Terra and Ether's ships hesitating, their crews reeling from the truth. The Umbral troops faltered, some dropping their weapons, others turning on each other in confusion. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a chance. Time to go, Marcus said, grabbing Lyrian's arm as the chamber began to collapse, pillars toppling in a cascade of dust and crystal. They sprinted for a side passage, the bond guiding them through the dark as the ruin crumbled behind them. The heat between them lingered, a promise unfulfilled, but survival trumped all else for now. They emerged into a smaller chamber, its walls intact, a faint glow illuminating a new console. Marcus slumped against it, catching his breath, Lyrian beside him, her hand finding his once more. "We're not done," he said, voice rough but resolute. "Not with them. Not with us." "No," she agreed, her glow steadying as she squeezed his hand, the bond humming with defiance and desire. "We fight on." The amber-lit chamber hummed softly around Marcus Ride and Lyrian as they stood in the aftermath of their escape, the dust of the collapsing ruins still settling in their lungs. The smaller console before them glowed faintly, its runes pulsing in time with their bond, a lifeline in a war that refused to let them rest. Marcus's arm throbbed where the plasma bolt had grazed him, his flight suit torn and bloodied, but the adrenaline kept him upright, his dark eyes scanning the shadows for threats. Lyrian leaned against him, her glowing form a steady warmth, her silver hair matted with grime, but her star-like eyes fierce with determination. Their hands remained clasped, the psychic link a steady current, defiance, survival, and a heat that hadn't faded despite the chaos. "We're not done," Marcus said, his voice a rough growl as he squeezed her hand, the weight of their shared fight settling into his bones. "Not with the Umbrals, not with the traitors, not with us." "No," Lyrian agreed, her glow flaring briefly as she met his gaze, her fingers tightening in his. "We fight on." The bond pulsed with her resolve, a mirror to his own, but beneath it simmered something deeper, a promise unfulfilled, a fire stoked by every touch they'd shared. The console flared brighter, a hollow projection flickering to life above it. Not the DNA helix this time, but a map of the void, dotted with signals from the fleet above. Marcus's breath caught as he recognized the patterns, Terra's ships realigning, Ether frigates pulling back from the brink of civil war, the Umbral Armada retreating in disarray. The signal they'd sent, the truth of their bond, the exposure of the traitors, had worked. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to fracture the enemy's momentum and force a fragile pause in the chaos. "They're listening," Lyrian said, her voice soft but edged with triumph. The broadcast reached them, Terra, Ether, even the Umbrals. "They can't ignore what we've shown them." Marcus snorted, a grim smile tugging at his scarred lips. "Doesn't mean they'll play nice. Traitors don't go quietly, neither do invaders." He pointed to the map, where rogue Terra signatures still blinked red, clustered near the Luminara's last known position. "We got unfinished business up there." "Then we finish it," she replied, stepping closer, her hand sliding to his chest. The bond flared, her warmth cutting through the cold ache of his wounds. "But not as their pawns. We choose our path now." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. They weren't just survivors. They were a force, a union neither Terra nor Ether could control. The console hummed, its energy offering a chance, a way to turn this ruin into more than a hideout. "Can this thing get us back?" he asked, eyeing the ruins. "Or at least call for backup?" "It can do more," Lyrian said, her fingers brushing the surface. The platform they'd teleported from flared in his mind through their link, a hub, she'd called it, part of an ancient network. It's a relay, communications, transport, maybe weapons if we unlock it. We stay here. We make it ours. Marcus's grin widened, a spark of defiance igniting in his chest. A base of our own? I like it. Screw command. Screw the elders. We hold this ground. We dictate the terms. She matched his smile, a rare curve of her silver lips that sent a jolt through their bond. Then we claim it. She pressed both hands to the console, and the chamber responded. Pillars flaring amber, the map expanding to show the void's hidden corners, relics like this one dotting the black. The signal pulsed again, weaker but steady, a beacon for any who'd listen. Terra loyalists, Ether rebels, anyone willing to fight the real war. The tension of battle ebbed, leaving them alone in the glow, the hum of the ruin a quiet backdrop to their shared silence. Marcus turned to her, the heat between them rising like a tide. We got a minute, he said, his voice low, rough with need. Before the next fight. Lyrian's eyes darkened, her glow pulsing as she stepped into him, their bodies aligning like magnets. A minute's enough, she murmured, her hands sliding to his shoulders, pulling him down. He didn't resist, his hands finding her hips, then drifting lower, past her waist, to the glowing curve of her thighs. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin there, a spot he'd sensed through their bond, and she gasped, her glow flaring like a supernova, her body trembling against his. Marcus, she breathed, her voice a plea as she pressed closer, her thighs parting slightly under his touch. The bond exploded, her desire crashing into his, a flood of heat and memory. Every moment they'd fought and survived together, fueling this one. His hands slid higher, tracing the inner curve of her thigh, the skin there softer, warmer, a nexus of sensation that drew a low moan from her throat. Her glow pulsed in time with his heartbeat, their minds merging fully, a raw, transcendent union that drowned out the war, the ruin, everything but them. Their lips met at last, a collision of need and release, her taste, ozone and sweetness, filling him as her hands gripped his hair, pulling him deeper. His fingers dug into her thighs, lifting her slightly, pinning her against the console as the chamber's energy synced with their pulse, amplifying the moment. It wasn't just physical. It was their bond, their fight, their defiance forged into something unbreakable. They pulled back only when the air ran thin, their breaths ragged, her glow softening as she rested her forehead against his. Later, Marcus rasped, his voice thick with promise, his hands still on her thighs, reluctant to let go. When we're not running for our lives. Later, she echoed, her smile a vow as she traced his jaw, the bond humming with a quiet certainty. They stepped apart, but the heat lingered, a fire that would flare again when the time was right. The console beeped, a new signal cutting through their haze. Terra ships approaching. Not hostile, their comms crackling with tentative hails. Marcus straightened, his soldier's instincts kicking in. Looks like we got friends after all. Lyrian nodded, her hand finding his once more. Or allies we forced to listen. Either way, we're not alone. They turned to the map, the void sprawling before them, a battlefield still alive with threats. Umbral remnants, rogue factions, secrets buried in the black. The ruin was theirs now, a foothold in a war they'd redefined. Marcus's skin tingled faintly, a subtle glow creeping into his scars, a mark of their bond, a change he couldn't deny. Lyrian's features softened too, her alien edges blurring with something human, a mirror to his transformation. We build here, he said, his voice steady, resolute. Train others, anyone who'll fight with us. This isn't their game anymore. She squeezed his hand, her glow flaring with agreement. A new front, a new beginning. The hollow map pulsed, rumors of other bonded pairs flickering at its edges, whispers of more like them, awakening in the void. The war wasn't over, but it was theirs to shape now, a legacy born from betrayal and sealed in fire. Marcus pulled Lyrian close one last time, his lips brushing her temple, the promise of later a spark in the dark. Whatever came next, war, truth, or each other, they'd face it together.